Layout of a hip roof. In this video, we're going to move on from standard gable-ended roofs to a hip roof, which is more complicated. In order to lay out rafters, it's important to understand the view of the roof. If a bird flew over the roof and looked down, you would see the plan or the top view. If you were standing on the sidewalk, you would see the elevation or the side view of the roof. Now that we have an understanding of the views, we need to mark out the position of the common rafter on the top plate. As in the previous video, we must measure the span of the building and calculate the length of the common rafters. For this model, we're going to assume it has a 612 slope. With the calculations complete, we now must mark the angles on the rafter. In this practical exercise, we're going to be using a pitch board. A pitch board is a simple triangle of plywood with a 6-inch and 12-inch for the two sides of a right-angled triangle. Now we use the hypotenuse side of the pitch board and align it with the edge of the rafter. The ridge plumb cut is now marked on one end. We measure down our calculated rafter length and mark the position of the heel plumb cut. The seat cut is marked depending upon whether it's on the print as a certain size, but the goal is that we don't cut too much of the rafter tail out, otherwise it will weaken the rafter. After we've marked out the seat cut, the next thing we have to add is the overhang, and this is then marked with a plumb cut. Now we can go to the miter saw, and with using the pitch board with the hypotenuse side against the fence of the saw, we can set the angle for the plumb cut. Once our cutting is complete, we want to check to make sure that our angles are correct by taking a pair of rafters and placing them on the wall to see if they fit exactly according to plan. Once you have that first pair of rafters cut and centered on the wall and they're fitting properly, you're going to need to install the second pair. The second pair are installed, but they have to be reduced by the thickness of the first pair of rafters. With the common rafters installed, we now must put in the hip rafter, which runs from the diagonal corner of the wall to the center of the roof. To understand how a hip rafter works, we have to look at the plan view on a 12 by 12 square. The diagonal of a 12 by 12 square is 17, which will be the run of a hip rafter. Now we create a pitch board for the hip roof, which composed of a 6-inch rise, which is the same as the common rafter, and a run of 17 inches. We now go to our rafter table and look for the hip rafter per foot run. Under 6 inches is 18. 18 is the run of the rafter. Now we go back to the miter saw with our 6/17 pitch board for our hip roof and set for the plumb cut. We must also set the miter saw to 45-degree angle in order to make sure that the rafter will fit where it's supposed to. The seat cut on the hip rafter is also lowered a little bit to make sure that it planes out properly on the corners. The hip rafter tail is also mitered on the end so that the soffits on both sides can meet in the middle. This is what it should look like when the hip rafters are installed. The last part of the construction is the installation of the hip jack rafters. Hip jack rafters are just shortened common rafters. The top of the hip jack rafter is cut on a 45-degree angle to meet with the side of the hip rafter in order to make it fit properly. Now you go and cut all your hip jack rafters as needed in pairs around the roof, making sure that they line up properly. Sometimes the pairs don't line up. This can be for various reasons. Sometimes the rafter is cut too long or too short, or sometimes the hip might be bowed or the wall plate might be bowed. But the goal is that they should line up equally on both sides. This concludes the hip rafter layout tutorial. Thank you for watching.